established Rich coming right back at you. And tonight we're gonna have a real conversation about something that's been brewing in the culture. Not loud, but deep in a man's spirit. Ever since the game dropped his new mixtape, people have been listening for any little line that might be about Kendrick Lamar. One verse come out, and fans start digging through it like they looking for gold in a treasure hunt.
That sounds like a shot at Kendrick. That's one. I don't turn down smoke. Let's read the lyrics. I don't turn up people's albums. First, guys were scared of my brother, so I started pulling up without him. Los Angeles king. Give me a rooftop, I'll shout it. And the man you thought was king ain't gonna do nothing about it.
But before we even go down that road, let's start with some truth people keep skipping over. The game has shown love to Kendrick Lamar for years. Real love, not industry love. He said he wanted to sign him. Said he knew he was special early. Even put him above himself on his own Los Angeles MC list. You don't praise a man like that if you got some secret hate in your heart. So why is everybody so quick to turn this into a beef? Why do people want the man to be throwing shots when half the time he probably is not even thinking that way? I'm gonna tell you why. Because at a certain point in life, the torch passes whether you ready or not. And every man don't handle that pass the same way. See, most people think they'll feel proud when the next generation takes it further than them. They think they'll be smiling like, yeah, I helped build that. But life don't always work like that because your heart is not always as mature as your mind. Sometimes you wanna be proud, but you feel something else, something heavier, something that makes you question your own story. And that's where the game is standing right now. Not in some public war, but in that quiet, private place where a man realizes the world moved on without him. The game came in with force, loud, confident, impactful. He was the identity of the West, and everybody knew it. He had the passion, the presence, the hunger, and he earned his place. He was that bridge from one era to the next. But here's the part that hurts. Eras end. And when your era ends before your heart is ready, everything after that feels like a reminder. A reminder that you don't pack the same buildings. A reminder that the culture don't revolve around your releases no more. And then you look up and see a man like Kendrick Lamar. A man from the same city, with the same soil in his shoes, rising higher than the whole blueprint you ever imagined. Kendrick got levels to his impact. He got the music, the mystique, the global love, and he got something you can't buy or borrow. The power of the people. When the people love you the way the people love Kendrick, you live in a different category. And the game knows that. He feels that, even if he won't say it. Look at what Kendrick did in just 1 year. A diss record that turned into a national anthem. A Compton block party that looked like a holiday. A Super Bowl performance as a cultural moment. That's different. And for a man like Game, that's hard to stomach. Not because he hates Kendrick, but because he sees a version of him that grew into something he couldn't become. This is what people misread what's really going on. This ain't about anger. This is about emotion, ego, and that quiet feeling of being overshadowed. The game ain't in his prime no more, and he know that. When you get older, you start measuring your career differently. And when you measure your career against a man who just had the greatest moment in hip-hop, that comparison hurts. Not because it's unfair, but because it's honest. That's why people keep reading tension in his verses. It's not always what he said. It's the energy people feel underneath it. The game has a pattern we cannot ignore. When he feels overlooked, he tends to turn towards the biggest person in the room. Not out of hate, but out of wanting to be seen again. But this time, the biggest figure in the room is not somebody who plays that game well. Kendrick don't argue. He don't respond. He don't entertain anything that's not aligned with his purpose. And that silence is louder than any diss record could be. Because you can't win against a man who refuses to step into the arena. So this ain't about shots fired. This is about a man trying to figure out his place in a world that no longer revolves around him. When the game released his new mixtape, people ran to the lyrics like it was a scavenger hunt, trying to find any lyric they think was aimed at Kendrick Lamar. But the real story here is not in the words. It's in the energy that surrounds him. Because energy don't lie, even when lyrics do. The game is rapping with passion. But it's a different kind of passion than in his earlier years. It's not just competitive, it's restless. It's a tension in his delivery, a force that feels less like confidence and more like a man trying to prove something to himself. And when a man is trying to prove something to himself, everyone around him can feel it, even if they never say a word. This is where the Kendrick comparison started to brew. Because when people see restlessness in one man and peace in another, they start to connect dots that were never meant to touch. They see a shift in one artist and confuse it for a statement about another. Now let's be honest here. The game knows exactly who Kendrick Lamar is in the culture. He knows how the community views him. He knows how the world views him. And he knows the moment belongs to him right now. But that knowledge, it does something to you when you come from the same city. It makes you reflect on your own impact, your own influence, your own place in the timeline. The game is old enough, experienced enough, and smart enough to know he's not competing with Kendrick Lamar in real time. He is competing with a version of himself that still remembers what it felt like to be the center of the West Coast. He remembers when his album drops felt like holidays. He remembers when his features shifted the culture. And now he watches a younger man have a year so monumental that no one, not even his biggest critics, could deny the impact. A year where Kendrick stopped being a rapper and became a symbol, a movement, and a cultural force. When Not Like Us hit, the world shifted. That song was more than a record. It was a celebration, a statement, and a city coming together in a way we haven't seen in years. The game watched what happened. He saw the crowds, the helicopters overhead, the footage that looked like history unfolding in real time. And whether he admits it or not, that feeling stays with you. It sits in your spirit. Not like anger, but a question. Where do I fit in now? And let's talk about that question because it's important. When you are a former king of a region, seeing a new king crowned publicly can create a knot in your chest you can't untangle. Not because you dislike the new king, but because you still remember the weight of the crown. And you're not sure if you let it go or if it was taken from you. Now add this to the mix. Kendrick does not respond. Not the rumors, not the speculation, not the lyrical whispers. Kendrick does not compete with any energy that does not match his purpose. And that right there is the part that hurts the most because you can match a man's bar. You can match a man's flow, but you cannot match a man's stillness. You cannot match a man who is unbothered by the noise. The game has always been a vocal artist, expressive, emotional, passionate. Kendrick is the opposite, strategic, selective, quiet until it's time to speak. So when the game releases music and the internet searches for hidden messages about Kendrick, they are really searching for something else. They are searching for a response that will never come. And that's where the rumors start. Not because the game said something, but because Kendrick refused to say anything back. And silence is the most dangerous sound in hip hop because it lets people imagine whatever they want. Now let's go deeper into why this hurts game more than anybody wants to admit. When an artist feels his prime is past, every new success of the next generation feels louder. The game is not jealous of Kendrick as a person, but he is jealous of what Kendrick represents. He represents the future. He represents the city's new heartbeat. He represents the level of love and global respect that game may never touch again. And for a man who once held the spotlight, that reality stings. Sometimes it's not about what a man says. It's about what people feel he wants to say. And right now, the world feels like the game is wrestling with something internal, an inner storm, not hatred, not anger, but discomfort. But in that silence, the game is only left with one opponent, himself. Because sometimes the hardest battle is the one where the other man refuses to show up. Before we close this story, we have to say something that most people would not like. The game is not in a beef with Kendrick Lamar. He's in a beef with his own reflection. Because when you look at a man like Kendrick, you don't just see success. You see a legacy, reach, respect. The game don't have to hate Kendrick to feel the weight of his presence. Sometimes another man's greatness quietly forces you to reevaluate your own. And that is exactly what's happening here. Not a feud, not a battle, but a private reckoning. A moment where a man realizes the world he once commanded has shifted to a new leader. And we need to be very clear about something. Kendrick Lamar has nothing to prove to anybody, and especially not to the game. Kendrick is operating on a level where his silence is louder than other men's diss tracks. He moves with purpose, not impulse. He speaks with intention, not emotion. So when the game releases new music, the only people trying to turn this into a war are the fans in the comment section. Because conflict is entertaining, but conflict is not always truth. The truth is that the game is a man who still wants to feel seen. And Kendrick is a man who no longer needs to be seen to be felt. The game is still chasing moments. Kendrick is creating movements. The game is still trying to prove he has something left. Kendrick is proving he has something bigger than music, a connection to the people that can't be denied. Now, let's talk about jealousy for a second. Not as an insult, but as a real human experience. Jealousy is not always hate. Sometimes it's a sign that you recognize another person is living the dream you stopped reaching for. The game sees Kendrick's year. He sees the victory lap, the cultural moment, the Compton celebration, and he knows he can't match that no more. And that's okay, because every man has a lifetime, but not every man has a second prime. The game is a legend in its own right, but that legend lives in a different part of history now. Not in the present moment where Kendrick is writing new history every month. This is why the game sounds like he's reaching for a challenge that Kendrick will never accept. Because you can only fight a man that sees you as an opponent. And Kendrick don't see the game as an opponent. And that's the mistake people are making in this story. They want a rap battle. But what's really happening is a spiritual battle in one man's heart. The game is watching a man from his own hometown achieve everything he wanted to in his prime. And that creates an internal question he can't ignore. Why him and not me? But that ain't a question for Kendrick to answer. That is a question for the game to face alone. Because even if the game dropped a diss track tomorrow, Kendrick would not respond. Not out of fear, but out of maturity. Kendrick has reached a position where responding to game would do nothing for him. So let's put this plain and simple. The war would never happen. because only one man is even standing on the battlefield. The game is waging a fight to prove he still matters. Kendrick is busy being the most important artist of this generation. This is not a feud. This is a fork in the road. One man is grappling with the end of his era. The other man is defining an era and will be studied for decades. And sometimes the healthiest thing that can happen in hip hop is for a conflict to remain unresolved, because resolution requires two people, and only one person sees a problem here. The game needs to find peace in the man he is today. Kendrick needs to keep moving as the man he was chosen to be. And the culture needs to stop forcing a narrative that don't serve either one of them. Which brings me to the real end of this story. This was never about lyrics. This was about legacy. This was never about bars. It was about time. And this was never about Kendrick Lamar. This was about Game trying to understand his place in a world that has outgrown his voice. And until he makes peace with that truth, he will always feel like Kendrick casts a shadow he can't escape. When in reality, Kendrick ain't even thinking about him. And that's where I'm gonna leave y'all at tonight. Not every story needs a winner, and not every moment calls for a fight. Sometimes the most honest truth is that one man is chasing closure, while the other man is chasing purpose. The game is wrestling with a feeling he can't admit out loud. And that don't make him a villain. It makes him human. But humanity can turn into pressure when you measure yourself against a man who stopped playing that game years ago. Kendrick Lamar don't respond because he doesn't need to. His work responds for him. His impact responds for him. His consistency responds for him. And sometimes the most powerful answer you can give another man is silence. The silence removes the illusion that a battle ever even existed. The game has his own legacy, his own chapters, his own impact. But that chapter belongs to another time, and it cannot be rewritten by trying to challenge the future. The only peace that will come from this is when he realizes that his value doesn't depend on the crown he once wore. But hey, that's just my opinion. What's yours? Like, comment, subscribe, establish R.I.C.H. I'll be back with another one. Peace.